Welcome to the 10th session of Disruptive Innovation Novice to Expert. We will start with a recap of session 9. Now, in session 9, we talked about how we should be selling solutions and not products, and how we realized by talking with customers and innovating that we could provide them full solutions. In that connection, we also found out that while for us a price of say 2 rupees per thousand with no cap was quite a meaningful amount, but for the customer, in terms of the fees that they paid as a percentage of the expenses that they had and the value that they got, that was not very significant at all. So this was a great solution that we had, where there was not much price sensitivity from the customer point of view. We also talked a bit about a passion for excellence and how that culture pervaded the whole business, and how we had set ourselves a target of getting to 100% market share, and how we almost nearly got there. To learn more about this, see the previous session. Now, in this session, what we will cover are some regulatory and risk issues, which are very important for most businesses. So the first thing that we ran up against on the regulatory side, which was an interesting problem, is that we had, because of all our bank partnerships and the way we had arranged them, that we would have fairly large balances in Citibank's accounts with our bank partners. So these were called our accounts. So our accounts with Allahabad Bank, with Dena Bank, and so on. Now, all these our accounts, they would qualify for the reserves that Citibank needed to maintain. So there were two types of reserves, the CRR and SLR. So CRR was the cash reserve ratio and SLR was the statutory liquidity ratio. Now at that time, while these did not qualify necessarily for CRR, but they qualified for SLR. These balances became very, very large, because if our business was moving around 5% of India's GDP through Citibank, so the amounts in these R accounts were quite significant. And as such, we probably would not have to buy government securities and things like that to maintain our reserves. Now, while this would be actually following the letter of the law, there was nothing wrong in not doing this, but it could be against the spirit of the law in the sense that these reserves were supposed to be there such that we were a very stable bank and so on and so forth. So we were concerned as a management team that the regulators, if they inspected us, might point this out and take a negative view. So we looked at this issue and finally decided that it wasn't really such a serious problem, and we would continue to carry on with no change and use these R accounts as our SLR balances. But we wrote a confidential memo to our file saying that we had met together as a management team and taken this decision, and if the regulators asked us, then this would be our stance, and so on and so forth. So it becomes quite important to be aware of what you're doing and whether it's within the spirit of the law, the letter of the law. Otherwise, it can come back to bite you. As we know that a few years later, because Citibank went too far on the disruptive innovation things and disregarded certain basic regulatory principles, they got into a lot of hot water in the Harshad Mehta scam. So you have to be careful about that. And it depends a lot on the business manager, who in this case was me. So as long as I am closest to the business and I kind of know what the regulatory risks are and I bring them up, then you'll be fine. But if you do have a business manager who is just worried about making money, and then you can run into some of the issues. So I think as a CEO, if you have a lot of business managers, trying to do disruptive things, it's pretty important to see that they're using the right kind of techniques and not the wrong ones. Now, on the risk side, there was another thing, because we were giving the customers money before their checks cleared. And in certain cases, especially where the clearing systems were not very efficient, it could take some days for the checks to clear. So there was a real risk. And at that particular point in time, which may not be that relevant now because clearing systems have become much more efficient, there used to be a scam which was called kiting, where you would deposit checks in an account and take advantage of the clearing delays to build up a sort of float and keep depositing checks here or there. And finally, the kite might fail, and the person who was advancing credit against this kite would be left holding the bag. Now, we were aware of kiting as a risk, and we had controls in place which we monitored. And even though we were dealing with very large companies, we did find a couple of companies when they got into a little bit of trouble with cash flow, that they did try to resort to kiting, and we actually found those out because we had controls in place. So again, it's very vital that you understand all the risks in your business. You think like a fraudster, think like a person who wants to take advantage of whatever systems you have, and you build defenses against possible risks so that you're not blindsided. And finally, we were getting a huge amount of data because we would know what the sales were, what was the regional breakup of the sales, were the sales going up in a month, down in a month. We could see, the same time last year, in this month, were the sales of the company going up or down. So actually, gradually we realized, now, of course, people know this very well, but at that time, we didn't realize the value of this data. But we did realize that we could use this for our own risk management processes. So Citibank had lots of other term loans, dollar loans, and other kinds of credit extensions to a lot of these customers. And having access to their cash management data was very, very valuable for Citibank. So there were a number of spin-off benefits of the cash management business getting this large. Now, of course, when a business gets large, it attracts competition, because initially people say, hey, this is something, I don't know what these guys are doing, they're crazy. But once it starts getting traction, then people start noticing. Now, we had a great advantage, in fact, that one of our biggest competitors who could actually blow us out of the water was State Bank of India, if they had got their act together, because they had so many branches and they participated in so many clearing systems. We had to do it through partners. They could do it directly. So they would have definitely got an advantage over us. But they were a relatively sleepy bank, and we therefore did not have much to fear from them as competition. This often is the case that sometimes the people who are the most logical competitors, because they're so big, they don't really focus on niche areas, and the innovators don't have to worry so much about those big competitors, but they have to worry about the startups and the nimble competitors and so on and so forth, much more than the big competitors. Because remember, by now, our cash management business is pretty large, right? So if there's somebody else who comes up with even a better solution than what we had, we could be in trouble. So one of the banks which tried to come up with a solution was Bank of America. And this again, they were not very successful at all, because what they tried to do was they tried to poach people from Citibank and help them design processes. And the people who left our team and joined Bank of America happened to be some of our worst people in the cash management kind of business, because the good people knew that they would get rewarded, they were having a great time, and they were hard to poach. But those people who weren't doing that well, because we had a pretty demanding culture, they were, happy to get poached. But then they weren't very good, so they wouldn't help the competitor that much. And the other thing was that they didn't realize all the nuances of the business, the fact that we were doing solutions and so on and so forth. They thought it was a straightforward funds transfer process, and they tried to compete on price. And as we saw before in the other sessions, price was not a very important determinant in this particular product. So we were able to hold our price. And we had, of course, a very good salesperson in Sanjay Nair, who almost made it an emotional issue for the customer. They could not leave us just because, say Bank of America was offering a much cheaper price. So with a bunch of these efforts, the thing was that we were fairly insulated against competition. So that's all that I wanted to cover in this session. We are now coming almost to the close of the cash management story. And after this story finishes, we will move on to Citibank Thailand and a story in a very different domain, not cash management, but custodial services. Thank you very much for listening to me.